You're talking about sports injuries.
Very common.
Talking about sports injuries. What kind of sports injuries do you see most in your office?
Well, you would think it would be the typical football injuries or wrestling injuries, but more often we see just the typical person going to the gym and working out and having a type of injury, or
Really?
just the morning jog, they get an injury. And the reason is, a lot of times after you've been doing it for a while, whether it's going to the gym or jogging, you start to become less cautious because you get so used to doing the same activity over and over, and you stop doing the things that are so necessary to prevent those injuries, like stretching and warming up. And before you know it, you might get a little injury, and I'm sure you've heard of just work through the pain, especially if you're doing it very often. And what'll happen is you're going to have a small injury, and in the long run it can turn into a big problem. So yeah, just typical working out, going to the gym,
So
running.
it's not like that. It's not like the you know, the soccer players or the football players. It's just people that are just going out for the jog or working out in the gym.
Well, those are the most common, of course, just
Interesting.
soccer players, and especially women. Soccer injuries, they could get vicious on the field. But you know, of course,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Of course not. Yeah.
They didn't call me the slammer for nothing.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and I still have the shoulder injury to prove it. No, I really do. This shoulder is still injured from years of playing soccer. For whatever reason, I still, like, even when I try and swim now, it just pops every time. I should probably have that seen.
Yeah, we see that pretty often.
Do you?
Well, yeah, because what happens is you'll have a shoulder injury, let's say back in high school, and let's say your shoulder's injured and it hurts to raise your arm every time this way. So what are you going to stop doing? Well, you're going to stop raising your
the arm.
Yeah, so after a while you start raising it lower and lower and lower, and 10, 20 years down the road you find yourself, you can't lift your arm anymore, and you get something that's called a frozen shoulder, which is an actual syndrome, which is you're not using your shoulder enough and it starts to freeze up, you start to build up scar tissue. So an injury that you might have had years ago in high school, all of a sudden starts to develop years and years later. So somebody will come into my clinic and they'll say, well, I don't know how I got the shoulder injury. A lot of times we could trace it back to some type of injury that they had back playing football or soccer or swimming or any other type of activity, other sports injury that they've had. And that's why it's so important to get it checked out as soon as possible.
Can it lead to other injuries? Let's say, let's use the arm as an example.
Yeah.
Let's say the person doesn't, you know, 20 years later and it's out. But what about, does it lead to, like, because the body is a symmetrical thing.
Yeah.
So you're overcompensating on the other side. Can it cause injuries on the other side?
Compensation
Like a
is
domino effect.
Absolutely. Compensation is a big factor, because if you stop using that right shoulder, well, you're going to have to start to use the other side. So
Oh,
when somebody,
compensation.
yeah, so you'll find that a lot of times the posture will change. If your neck hurts to bend in this direction, all of a sudden you'll walk the entire day in the other direction, and you start to develop all these other injuries. So in essence, the body does start to fall apart because it's trying to make up for all those injuries that you've had. So it will compensate, and you will start to notice other injuries like sciatica, neck pain, arm pain.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, very common.
You are a black belt in what kind of martial arts?
I think I am wearing a black belt, yes. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah,
you
well,
know what
I do mixed martial arts. I'll do jiu-jitsu, karate, kempo karate, and I've been doing that for years and years. I can relate with a lot of the people that come to my clinic with injuries, because they'll get martial arts injuries, they'll get sports injuries, and I experience the same types of injuries. But,
like what?
Oh, but like neck injuries, like shoulder injuries. So I get those regularly, but I do the right things to make sure that I prevent them.
Like what?
You know, martial arts, it's one of these things. A lot of times people say, well, that's not safe. Well, if you want to be safe, you don't do it. But you want to try to minimize the risk. You want to make sure that you stretch out before you're doing the activity. You want to make sure that you're warming up before you're doing the activity, and knowing your limits anytime you're doing those types of things. And that'll prevent neck sprains, it'll prevent shoulder injuries, knee injuries, you know, some of the different things that anyone can experience doing that.
I think you said not safe. I think it's not safe to not be active
Well,
in
absolutely.
an activity.
Yeah.
Some of which, you know, on the scale of, you know, could be injured a little bit higher than others. You know, if you're playing golf, you know, or you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu,
Yeah.
which is awesome. I didn't know you did that.
Yeah.
That's grappling, right?